again, thank you for attending this panel on Indigenous Peoples and Center-Periphery Dynamics as part of the Decolonizing Global Studies conference. Um, just some reminders. I am Nassef, Manabilang Adiong, part of the Decolonial Studies program at the Center for Integrative and Development Studies at University of the Philippines, Diliman. And these are just some of the reminders to everyone. The session is being recorded. The recording will be made available at a later date. And kindly keep your microphone set on mute while the presentations are ongoing. And all questions must be coursed through the chat box function of the Zoom meeting room and indicate the speaker to whom you are addressing your inquiry or to the entire panelist. And observe discretion if you're posting in the chat box, and the moderator, me, has actually have the I'll decide if some unacceptable decorum is manifesting in the chat box. If you wish to receive a certificate of attendance, you must first accomplish the evaluation form sent with the Zoom credentials, and the evaluation form will be accepting responses after the conference. And we have three presenters for this panel. The first one will be presented by Jose Monfred C. from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He has actually presently doing a synchronous session with his class. And thank you for your time, Monsi. Is going to talk about decolonizing historical imagination in through children's books for the Lumad. And the second one is with Alexander Horstmann. Professor Alexander is from Tallinn University in Estonia and is going to talk about imperialist behavior and xenophobia in southern Thailand and Rakhine, Myanmar. And the last presenter, we have Benjamin Pwee from International Islamic University of Malaysia. And the paper is about Western and Islamic concepts of nation state limiting post-colonial political development in Muslim majority countries in Asia. All right, so I'll stop the screen sharing and we'll go ahead with the first presenter, Hussein Monfred C. from UP Diliman. You have the virtual floor, Monsi. And thank you everyone for attending this panel.
Nassef, could you allow me to screen share?
Yes, yes. Are you able to screen share your through your account?
Yes, I think I can.
Okay, thank you.
I think I just need to be a host.
All right. Which is your? I'll just a second, and I'll make you a co-host, and also Benjamin. I'll make Benjamin
All right.
co-host.
Okay.
All right. You can start now, Monsi.
Yes. Okay. Can you see my screen?
No. No. All right. So now it's being shared now.
Okay. Is my
Through your
presentation?
mobile phone.
Is my presentation visible?
Yes, it's visible now.
Thank you so much. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Monsi from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. So I'm in the middle of my synchronous classes actually, but besides that, I'm also a volunteer teacher for the Save Our Schools Network, or the Lumad Bakwit School, where most of my knowledge and studies about the Lumad tourism in particular and Lumad literature comes from. So a bit of introduction before we go to my ongoing study actually about Lumad children's book, just a background about the Lumad people. The Lumad as a term, as an autonym, is actually Cebuano, a Cebuano shorthand for Katawang Lumad, or native, born of the earth, or people of the land. So this collective political identity, composed of 18 ethno-linguistic groups in Mindanao or southern Philippines, has been used for the longest time, but it has been affirmed as a political identity, particularly under the Marcos dictatorship before, in order for these 18 groups to collectively lobby for self-determination over their Yutang Kabilin. So Yutang Kabilin is their ancestral land, or lupang ninuno in Filipino. So this autonomy, this political collective identity has allowed them to fortify their stance against the dictatorship, especially in light of that government's failed mineral regime. And after that, the alliances between these different tribes have continued for them to be able to, as I will argue in the rest of the presentation, resist colonial or imperial influence in their lands. A particular strategy that has been that could be observed in their strategies is to maintain control over their communal territories in the hinterlands. Because before, some of them have lived in the plains, in the lowlands, but they have been driven up to the mountains due to colonization. And that colonization, as a historical fact, has continued in different ways, from Spanish colonization to American, and now under the Philippine government, who has tried to get parcels of their lands for the benefit of mining and logging and other profitable concessions. I will focus particularly on Luma Education, of course, because the children's books that I'll be discussing have been produced in the premise that they will be used as part of the history classes of the Lumad students. So the establishment of alternative schools or tribal schools for the Lumad in the Philippines is actually an exemplar attempt at responding to the incompetency of the state to provide educational services in the farthest reaches of the country. So emerging from these, from the endeavors of religious groups, missionaries who have come to the Luma territories in around the 1990s, the Luma communities themselves have uplifted the high incidence of illiteracy in Mindanao through establishing their own schools by themselves. Of course, with the financial and logistical support of said religious groups, also academe, scholars, non-government organizations, and other activists and advocacy organizations. And these schools, interestingly, by wearing an indigenous framework in their curriculum, striking a compromise between mainstream and community-centered education, somehow would be a kind of a counterpoint to the design of formal education homogeneously implemented in state or government schools in the Philippines. As I noted in the slide, they have a focus on a triadic curriculum, where academics, which would be present and compliant, in fact, compliant to the government's education program, is related closely to agriculture and health. To give a concrete idea, some of their classes like science, mathematics, and language or communication arts are taught through agricultural practice. And agricultural practice is very important for indigenous Luma children because it's a way for them to learn somehow their love for the land, their stance for the land, and for them to continue reframing their ancestral lands as useful land. As a counterpoint to how the government, in support of foreign corporations and corporate concessions, framing the Yutang Kabilin or the ancestral land as idle lands, ripe for mining, ripe for logging and plantations. And with agriculture, we also have education about health, and it's so interesting and rewarding to see how a lot of these indigenous students know first aid at a very young age. Some of them even practice agriculture, coinciding with their spiritual beliefs. So again, it's a kind of a triad of learning thrusts or spirit in their curriculum, which are actually reflected and articulated by the books that they use in their class, which will be discussed as part of my study. Here, I'm asking the primary question: how do works of history or historiography for Lumad children rework the knowledges, subjectivities, world senses, life worlds, particularly their Yutang Kabilin, denied by colonial and imperial plunder? And I emphasize plunder here because, as I will discuss, the coloniality or the colonial operation that they have experienced in history since the era of colonization in the Philippines has been felt concretely and violently even until today. And so advocacy organizations like the Save Our Schools Network and a lot of Lumad alliances, intertribal alliances among Lumad tribes recognize the violent attacks against their people as part of an imperialist scheme of plunder in the immediate ecologies, in the immediate environment of their Yutang Kabile. And the two children's books in this chapter or in this paper would be Pangiyak, Kwento at Panawagan ng mga Bayani ng Mindanao, or Battle Cry, Stories and Calls of the Heroes of Mindanao, and Birang at mga kwento tungkol sa bayaning Lumad. Birang and other stories about Lumad heroes. Birang is actually written in Cebuano, but we do have Filipino translation of this, while Pangiyak also has an English translation. And these books, while they are sold externally in order to fund these schools, they are also being used by the students themselves during their classes as a complement to the history books mandated by the Department of Education in the Philippines. So as a framework, or as a way for me to articulate my arguments, I'm reading these history books as a part of a radical children's literature tradition, wherein here writing needs to start from the assumption that these children, particularly the Lumad children, are capable of being socially aware and are interested in changing society. And for these children particularly, this interest in changing society is more of a need than just a want, because they have been quite immediately and concretely affected by attacks of violence, including displacement, bombing, and militarization in their schools, to open up their parcels of land for businesses. So these books envision new ideas about how society could work for them and also for other people, not only for their tribes. And as I said, given that these books are also textbooks for their history classes, these books could help them acquire skills, ideas, and information, particularly reading comprehension skills, that they will need to bring about this progressive change. So it's not only about the content, but it's also about the usefulness of these texts as history textbooks for these children. And of course, there is definitely a strong decolonial thrust in these history books. Just the fact that these books are about history, being a counterpoint to the mainstream historical accounts being taught in government schools, these books are somehow contributions to the decolonial project in the Philippines, as it rests on the understanding of imperial power and its implication in structures of racial, or in this case, ethnic discrimination, as well as the fraught processes of disentangling this society from the economic, political, social, cultural, and psychological damages of imperial influence. At its heart, the historical study of empire, which is articulated, is expressed in these children's books, are at the heart of decolonization, and it does gives us a piece or a fragment of a global story. Particularly in these children's books, we're focusing on history, and the idea of decolonizing history is everywhere today, especially in education. Hence, we do have the Decolonial Studies program in the University of the Philippines. And these interesting conversations must be anchored on the objective to diversify and rethink how history is taught and understood. And I think that this contribution to history education in the Philippines from the Lumad schools could also be done, right, as part of our project to decolonize history education in the Philippines. So, given the time constraints, and although I would like to discuss the books in depth, I could only discuss a few stories, I suppose, from these books, because these books are somehow an anthology of different oral narratives of the heroes of Mindanao, particularly the leaders of different Lumad tribes. And this includes, for instance, by Bibiyaon Lingkayan Bingkay. And then all of these stories, while they are non-fictional, they are, again, part of their oral history, part of their oral narratives, they are all framed by the device of the child there's always a child, an actual real life child related to the said hero, um, maybe a grandchild or a child from the tribe, a child from the community who acts or who act as the narrator in these different historical narratives. Although from the methodology of the creation of these books, they have come sometimes, if not from the leader, from other community members, not the children themselves. And hence, I term these child narrators as devices in the story in order to relate the story of the leaders and their leadership as tribal leaders to child readers as well. So somehow it is a blend of nonfiction and fictional strategies in order to communicate the history close to the strategy of oral history in their different tribes. And definitely oral history is at the heart of the decolonizing project because it ensures that the histories of those who did not leave written texts behind are not forgotten. And these books are a testimony to that project. Here in this story in particular of Bay Bibiaon, Liwai, the juvenile narrator of the story, describes the Pantaron Range, a biodiversity hotspot preyed upon by different corporate entities for its mineral reserve, not only as ancestral home, right, but also as a world sense different from what is taught in government-sponsored or government-mandated history books. The narrative, as I quoted here, the Pantaron is a marketplace, a pharmacy, a school for the Manobo. So this narrative magnifies a scene from the life of our hero by Bibiaon, who helped form the alliance of Salugpungan Tatano Igkanugon, or Unity of the People to Defend Ancestral Land in Manobo. In 1994, this was to unite 83 disparate Manobo tribes against the encroachment of a logging company under the Marcos regime. So I won't go into the details, but I guess we already have a sense of how the stories are presented. Okay, and another story here we have Datu Apoga, another leader, and as you've noticed here we have the Datu. A while ago we have the Bae or Bai. Datu and Bai are actually refer to the male and female leaders of the different Lumad tribes. In this case, in this story, Datu Gibang explains to his grandchild Mangub, who is an actual grandchild of the Datu, but of course the use of Mangub as a child narrator is a device as part of this narrative. He describes how the relational fabric of nature operates in the ancestral land. So here, they witness how the soil erodes, not caused not by rain. Take note, but by the denudation of forests, which he explains in the story is part of logging and plantation concessions brought about by foreign companies. So there is always an emphasis on how foreign companies and corporate concessions are made possible by state intervention. And some of these stories, which are situated during the Spanish colonization. So both books begin with Spanish colonization and end with current leaders in the Luma tribes. They somehow bridge the past and the present, giving a sense of temporality different from how historiography is conceived, which is quite similar, of course, to oral history as experienced and taught locally in these different tribes. And particularly these retellings of historical narratives of these heroes of Mindanao, particularly of the Lumad people, suggest an environmental knowledge construed by the book's composite historiography, which fosters a radical Georgic relationship and stewardship over the Yutang Kabilin, or the ancestral land. So this perception of land does not only necessitate a pro-environmental ethic, but they also encourage and organize resistance against institutions and powers that seek to encroach the ancestral land. So I think some of you who have attended the the keynote sessions yesterday might have heard the different concepts and theories related to relationality, or as what Walter Mignolo would conceptualize as the vincularidad. no? Which I will discuss in a bit. But before going to that, I want to go to one more example. We have Datu Birang as well, who more concretely pinpoints American imperialist influence in ancestral lands in different parts of the story, which of course I can't recount all of which. He takes note of how they lived before in the plains, in the lowlands, nearby the sea, which became their playground. However, because of plantations, they can't go back to that area anymore of their ancestral lands. And in another part of the story, of this historical narrative, he explains how the Americans continue to expand their plantations there. So it's interesting how these different historical narratives for communities, for community tribal schools, locate the Lumad as part of a global story. Unfortunately, the global story is an imperial conquest, an imperial enterprise, no? And particular attention has been given on the idea of a playground and how their ancestral land is a home for children, taking note of the fact that the readers of these children's books are, of course, the children, the students of the different Lumad schools. So this spatial analysis of the ancestral lands and how they have changed ownership over the years in history is part, or is it somehow a decolonial tool of unmapping? Unmapping or mapping the anti-colonial, wherein, as I said a while ago, relationality between the Lumad children and the Lumad heroes and their lands are fortified. Fortified in light of the need for resistance. All right? So this interdependence and search for balance and harmony in life is definitely part of any decolonial project. It's just interesting that that in these books, there are different devices, different narratives that articulate the need to resist as part of this decolonial project, not only in terms of form as oral history, but also as an active, continued resistance. As said by Todd and Robert, decolonial discourses have been ongoing and have led to new understandings and formulation of what the decolonial journey entails for individuals. And in these children's books, these history textbooks, we can definitely notice how these different forms of resistance have changed throughout the years. And definitely we felt that because, again, as I said, these textbooks begin from colonization. From the point that these people have been displaced from what they would perceive as their ancestral land or Yutang Kabilin. And until now, these different concessions have been continuing, wherein, according to our data at Saver Schools Network, already 500 hectares of the land of the 5 regions of Mindanao, covering 12% of Mindanao's agricultural land, have been used for foreign plantations and logging operations, some hundreds of which are part of the Lumad territory. So here, the books somehow commit to a two-pronged objective, no? So they question the canonical history and history education itself by wearing the form of oral history and using the child narrator as a mediator between past and present. And the other objective is that these books are able to question the world as an imperial project, the world itself, no? And they're part of the world, of such a world being worlded by history that we're trying to decolonize. Wherein here, in this case, the world being articulated by the different heroes starring in the stories would be the Lumad life world, in contrast to an imperialist enterprise. So here, decolonizing history at the broad level unquestionably requires a deep engagement with empire, right? So as a conclusion, a tentative conclusion, as this study is still ongoing, and I'm trying to include other books, not only history books, for this study, by complementing mainstream history books used in government schools, Pangyak and Birang disturb the totality from which history, both Philippine and quote-unquote world, is expressed and taught traditionally, thus decentering historical knowledge, particularly for the Lumad audience. And I think the lessons that we can take away from the production of these books is the need to produce and consume decolonial knowledges from subjects themselves of anti-imperial resistance. And definitely, we should be able to study, understand, and take part in the concrete, material, and ongoing decolonial projects engaged at present. Okay? So I think that ends my presentation for today. I think I won't be able to stay in the conference longer because I need to conduct my classes. But if you do have questions and I definitely would like to share my study in a more in-depth way, you can definitely email me. Uh, I'll just give my email in the chat. So thank you so much for listening. And I do hope that we're all able to take part in the decolonial or anti-imperial project of the Lumad people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mon. We have a question here. Um, just going to share this
Definitely,
one.
definitely. I think I
We have a
can.
question here from, I didn't see it. Try to get to the chat from Mel, and she is asking, do we know the importance of oral histories and narratives? Up to what extent can we weigh their reliability and validity in such a way that there are no misinterpretation and misrepresentation as these stories are told and retold?
Right. Uh, okay. Thank you so much, Mel, for this question. This is actually a very interesting question and an important one, definitely. But I think to respond to this, we must have in our heads the framework or the idea that oral histories are not meant to be pinned down. And I think that would be the epistemological framework of oral history, which have been observed by many indigenous tribes across the world. That's how historiography is valued, at least as far as my integration and studies have come to, that's how historiography is valued and conducted by these people. And so I think their oral histories are strategic as well. As I said, there is a mixture, a blending of different strategies in how they conduct their historiography at the local level. And given that oral history is basically narratives that are passed down in order to foster the contiguity and continuity of their local communities, the stories must matter to the communities. Okay, so definitely in framing these Lumad leaders as heroes of their communities, they already have at the back of their heads an objective that these histories will be able to encourage their children, encourage their youth and the members of their community to continue their struggle for the ancestral lands. So basically the point is that if their oral history or if fragments or aspects of their daily lives do not contribute to the contiguity of their community, then those parts and those fragments may not be a part of oral history. Although, of course, this project, the publication of these books, the creation of these textbooks, already strike a compromise between that local knowledge, that indigenous knowledge, and the need to respond to uh, I guess to the needs or the requirements of a government school. Because as I've mentioned earlier, the Lumad schools are made as a balance between an indigenous framework of education and what has been sanctioned by the government. And so to provide, and since textbooks are not that accessible to these children in faraway regions, in order to provide the history book for them, they are given these books which reflect the needs of their communities.
All right. Thank you, Mon. And there's some few follow-up questions, which are also, I think, related to my question about study on relationality, how this conceptualization of relationality reflect on the relations between the migrant settlers and the inhabitants of the lands of the Lumads in Mindanao. As you can see that there is also a kind of perpetuating coloniality or continuous colonial matrix of powers brought in by the migrant settlers in Mindanao
Yeah,
that
yeah,
has somehow afflicted to the lived experiences and everyday lives of the Lumads or the indigenous peoples. And this is somehow also connected to Casey Sierra's question on how essential for the students, for example, from Metro Manila, the stories of non-indigenous people Uh, and she also said that what is the essence of getting in touch with indigenous people, how it is relevant in their lives as students in Metro Manila. And also I'll try to link this with Mel's follow-up question on how
Right.
can you reconcile Lumad or indigenous people's education with the mainstream Filipino education.
Right.
She said that you mentioned about children's literature. Can you cite other concrete examples of the areas of differences, and are there are also areas of similarities, especially in the area of history, culture? So there is somehow a kind of questioning regarding how can we find a dialogue between the Lumads'
Mhm.
reflective of their stories and their importance of their lives, and would somehow influence institutional policies through the government agencies such as the Department of Education and Commission on Higher Education. If their
Wow.
stories and other, I think, indigenous people's knowledge and sciences can be incorporated in this policy, in these educational policies.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Nassef, for giving me the questions. Casey's question is actually very interesting, and I think everyone in the panel could answer to this because the question is basically a reflection about decolonial pedagogy in itself, right? So if we enlarge Casey's question from indigenous people to marginalized groups, we are actually talking about decolonizing pedagogies in theory and in praxis. Because as I said, since maybe I could focus on history in particular, given my topic, history as critiqued by so many scholars already are anchored or are part are fragments of a global imperial conquest. And I think well, of course, that's a generalization, but something that we could easily notice. No, if we study our history and history textbooks in particular, and there are other scholars in the Philippines who work on this, history textbooks are anchored on imperialism, on different empires colonizing the Philippines. So that's already, while of course many of those are facts, that emphasis is already a part of a global imperial enterprise, a part of a part somehow of a colonized education or a colonized historiography, we could say. And so part of the decolonizing history is definitely two-pronged. One is to question the imperial or colonial influence in mainstream, quote unquote, historiography and history, maybe in textbooks or whatever our focus would be. And then the other would be to emphasize and to somehow to bring out to other spaces histories that have been marginalized by such imperial or mainstream histories. Not, and I guess this is an answer to the question, not to appropriate these histories as our own, but to acknowledge the fact that our history, the mainstream historiography or the historical knowledge that we has been influenced by imperial powers. No, particularly in the situation of the Lumad.
Hello, Monsi. I think you were muted. Hello.
To people hello.
Yes, I
Can
think
you
you
hear
were
me?
muted. Some.
Sorry.
Okay, continue.
As I was saying, the Lumad, these different textbooks actually are supposed to also contribute to the struggle of the Lumad by engaging non-indigenous readers. No, because as I said, this actually some of these stories are already part of their oral history, diba? But uh, by being in the form of textbooks, they are able to reach out to those outside their communities. And so, um,
Uh-huh. Hello, Ma. Hello, Man. Are you still there?
going,
All
uh,
right.
hello,
Okay, because we didn't get
is
what
that here?
you said. Yes, yes.
Okay. As I was saying, these texts are trying to engage non-Indigenous readers for them to be part of the different campaigns engaged by the Lumad communities.
All
So I
right.
hope it already answers your question. And then, sorry, I think my internet connection is not that good right now. But to answer the other question from Mel, uh, this could actually take a different conversation, its own. This question about the reconciliation between government-sponsored education or government-sanctioned education and human education. Actually, uh, we have been an active part in this quote unquote reconciliation. What we did was to identify which aspects or which subjects in the DepEd or Department of Education curriculum could be useful to the communities. No, in fact, we have as I said a while ago, we have this triadic formula in our heads when we were uh, producing textbooks and all of that. We need to strike a balance between academics, basically what are taught in mainstream schools, and also agriculture and health. So whatever we teach our Lumad students in these different schools must be useful to their life world. So for instance, if we're teaching mathematics, then mathematics must be used to, for instance, help them conduct agricultural practices, maybe particularly in statistics, as part of their community organizing or community development. So basically, what we do is try to decolonize somehow these subjects. Actually, just for the final word before I leave, as someone who taught English in the Lumad school, and English is actually a very important subject for these children. Not because they want to understand English so that they could go abroad or work abroad or go to the different cities in the Philippines. English education in the case of the Lumad school is somehow being decolonized as well. What we do here is to teach them the language so that they would be able to understand legal contracts, policies, laws, and all of those other documents. So that, for instance, if there would be people who try to who force the Lumad people to sell their lands, these children in the future would not be swindled because part of the oral narratives, and this is actually part of of some of the stories in the textbooks I've cited, these some leaders would tell us about how they were swindled before into selling their lands because they can't read the contracts. It's something as simple as that. And so English education has become quite important for the children because as long as the academic component or subject could be helpful to their struggle for the ancestral land, then definitely we teach that. And that includes history. That includes history, of course. So sorry if I took too much time because of the spotty internet.
That's all. That's all right. Thank you, Jose Monfred, who is now doing a synchronous class at the UP Diliman. And thank you for your insightful presentation on trying to promote and also advance Lumad's perspective in the education, especially going through the historical imagination using children's book. So you can so see you in the next following activities, feature activities of the Decolonial Studies program, Monsi, and thank you for your
All right.
participation.
Thank you everyone for listening, and thank you Nassef for moderating.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So we'll go on to the next presenter, Professor Alexander Horstmann from Tallinn University. And the title of his presentation is on imperialist behavior and xenophobia in southern Thailand and Rakhine in Myanmar. You have the virtual floor now, Alexander. I'm going to unmute you. So I'll just stop this share if you have some PowerPoint presentation that you will want to screen share for everyone.
Yeah, unfortunately, I will just read my paper.
That's all right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for the fascinating paper on the Lumad. I'm interested in very similar questions and of I'm interested in very similar questions in southern Thailand and Myanmar, and I'm especially interested in the postcolonial state and its relation to ethnic and religious minorities and the mimicking of the colonial state in a way. So I was very interested in the paper on the Lumad. It reminded me very much of my fieldwork, my ethnographic fieldwork with the Shan and with the Karen in the Southeast Asian Massif, where very similar processes are unfolding, and in a way it's a very sad story. It's a story of appropriation and a story of resistance. And so thanks very much again also to Nassef for inviting me to the Decolonizing Religion network, which I benefited a lot. And I want to read a paper that engages with religious pluralism and with religious nationalism and what Seipel calls covenantal pluralism, which means which simultaneously is about top-down legal and policy parameters and bottom-up cultural norms and practices. So, can you hear me well?
Yes, yes, we do.
Yes, should I maybe a little bit louder? Okay, yeah.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, thanks so much. So, political monks in alliance with other well-resourced nationalist organizations have worked to create an atmosphere of othering any group that is not Buddhist and are not part of the dominant Bamar ethnic group. The mobilization of hatred against the religious other constitutes an organized burden for the future of intercommunalism in Myanmar. Yes, there are also structures and norms that various communities of practice are embodying that point against hatred and strive towards covenantal pluralism. For achieving this vision of covenantal pluralism, it would be necessary to establish a constitutional framework that would protect religious minorities from harm. At the same time, it would be necessary to enable an atmosphere of common struggle against discrimination and defamation that would support a thriving civil society in which community leaders of different faiths would work together towards a better and more peaceful society. There are some organized efforts to promote these kinds of aspirations in Myanmar today. For example, we see young educated professionals and former student activists join international NGOs who, together with Western peace activists, make substantial efforts to empower emerging civil society in Yangon and elsewhere. But apart from organized civil society, and as such much less visible to outside observers, constructive interactions within and between faith groups can be found in the everyday of the neighborhoods rather than in formalized structures of the vertical power of the state. For religious freedom and covenantal pluralism to take root in Myanmar, it will be necessary to bring different faith groups together in the neighborhoods to boost human rights and the democratic participation, as well as the social mobility of the ethnic minorities, and to recognize their citizenship as well as their religion. Ethnic and religious minorities have suffered under decades of military rule, economic ruin, and international isolation. Civic organizations use the opening of civic space and the social media enthusiastically since 2011, but so did Buddhist nationalist activism. 9 years after the opening, after 2011, Myanmar is again isolated after the military operations and atrocities against the Rohingya in Rakhine, Western Myanmar, and the frustration seeing perpetrators, both military elites and Buddhist vigilance, go largely unpunished. But there are also signs of hope for rapidly developing civil society and for democratization. The elections in 2021 will show if the National League for Democracy and its leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, does still enjoy the popularity and support that it received in 2015 when the NLD won a landslide victory. Religion seemed to play a crucial role in this bitter contestation over Myanmar's identity and direction, as a new generation of political monks instrumentalized Buddhism to abuse their power and authority in the name of protecting Buddhism. Religious freedom and gender are of central importance in multi-religious Myanmar and shape not only identity but also citizenship, social mobility, like life chances and belonging in a contested imagined community. The state councillor and foreign minister Aung San Suu Kyi has disappointed many by endorsing and refostering the ideology of national race instead of helping to dismantle it. Thus, an embrace of covenantal pluralism in Myanmar would constitute an important step not only towards religious freedom, but also towards peace. As a basis, it would be important to recognize the diverse identities that have been and continue to be part of Myanmar, and to redefine belonging by giving recognition and equality to all ethnicities and all religions. Understanding the historic context is crucial for the state of religion and its relationship to secularism and prospects for robust pluralism in today's Myanmar. Myanmar is not only overwhelmingly Buddhist, it is one of the least secular societies in the world. The period from 2011 to 2020 has seen a revitalization of Buddhist nationalism and Buddhist symbols against the expectations that democratization would lead to a decline in religion. As the revitalization of Buddhism is closely tied to the perceived threat to Buddhism posed by other religions as well as secularism, I've called this the new phenomenon, Buddhist protectionism. The nationalist organizations also benefit from the secularization to introduce new legislation. The race and religion laws provide a powerful tool. So there are new laws, nationalist Buddhist laws introduced into the constitution. They're now part of the law, official law. And there was a public referendum by the ultra nationalist Buddhist kind of right-wing organization Mabata, okay, and they collected about 2 million votes, and mainly also from women who felt that they needed protection and that the race and religion laws could provide them that protection in the absence of a law on domestic violence in Myanmar. There's no law on domestic violence whatsoever in Myanmar, right? So the race and religion laws, I think, provide a powerful tool to use law to advance the political agenda of religious nationalism, Buddhicizing the state. And this is, of course, the dynamic of internal colonialism, right, that I'm interested. So political monks have successfully used the Buddhist courts to sentence progressive Buddhist intellectuals also, and Buddhist monks who do not, obey to this nationalist ideology, who want to open Buddhism for religious critique in public space, to open public for blasphemy and insult, right? So there are progressive monks who are imprisoned for opening up Buddhism in the public space for religious critique, right? So, and there's a Buddhist law which is unique to the to Myanmar, yeah, a Buddhist law, and this Buddhist law will be will decide, right, the everything on Buddhist teaching, right, and Buddhist ideology. From in 2015, there was an important power shift, and the use of religion for political electoral purposes is banned, yet political salience of religion is obvious. The ban of the monkhood from political participation and voting, so the number is actually of monks and nuns, Buddhist nuns in Myanmar is very substantial. So, so the Mabata also wants the monks to vote in the elections, right? That would, of course, strengthen Buddhist nationalism. So this emic view of Buddhist disenfranchisement is important to understand the political position of the monkhood. Moreover, the Buddhist court system in Myanmar that has been introduced after the pressure from the Saffron Revolution in 2007 continues a particular Buddhist legal culture, which I said. So it's very important to understand that the Buddhist courts are used to discipline the Buddhist field, okay? For example, in Metila, there was communal violence in Metila, and against and Muslims have been killed, and I mean, the atrocities are very very difficult to describe for me. I witnessed. I mean, I visited Metila, and just after the massacre in Metila, and the Ashilvira, to the extremist monk from Mabata, he appeared in Metila just before and after the massacre, okay? And but there were also some monks who protected Muslims in their monasteries, all right? And so in a way, Buddhist law, which is unique to Myanmar, as I pointed out, yeah, is used to discipline precisely these monks, all right, who want to open the religious field for critique, okay? So beginning in 1962, with the military regime of Ne Win, decades of military rule and isolation have created an atmosphere of fear and isolation, not least on the part of the religious minorities. The military junta tried to legitimize itself as protector of Buddhism and invested in Buddhist monuments and monasteries and supported Buddhist missionaries to convert the minorities in the hills to Buddhism. So there is a state missionization also. Yeah, it's very important also because this is very much understudied. I'm very interested into that. Also in Thailand too. Yeah. So there are Buddhist monks, right? Going as establishing bases in the ethnic minority regions, yeah, to convert ethnic minority people to Buddhism, yeah. So say from animism to Buddhism, or from sometimes from Christianity to Buddhism, back to Buddhism, yeah. So and this is supported by the state. It's very important to understand. And the Mabata, right? they actually join the state missionaries, yeah, the state Buddhist monks to the ethnic minority regions to spread their propaganda, and they connect especially to the Buddhist ethnic minorities in the ethnic minority regions, yeah. So the ideology of the military regime was ultra-nationalist, militaristic, chauvinistic, and xenophobic, very important, right? So the persecution of the Rohingya and the statelessness of the Rohingya, because the Rohingya have no citizenship rights whatsoever, right? So they have no means of education, right? This has a long history, right? This has a long history. The regime heavily discriminates against minority religions in general, not only against Islam, also against Christianity, for example, occasionally closed mosques and churches or dismantled religious symbols such as crosses, and delayed or denied the permission to build a new mosque or religious school, madrasa, etc., or to renovate an old one. The regime further put Islam and Christianity under strong surveillance and denied the churches and mosque material support from international networks. Moreover, the ultra-nationalist agenda of the military junta amplified the ethnic differences by subjecting the population to radicalized citizenship. Citizenship was hierarchically constructed and put the Buddhist Burma at the apex of society, but minorities were put at a lower level. Citizenship in Myanmar is differentiated according to racial categories. Muslims were handed Indian or Bengali identity papers. So they are called, until today, right? Until today, my friends say my best activist friend, right? He is Muslim and he has a Indian Islam identity card, right? Indian Islam, it's written Indian Islam. So the administration gives him this identity card saying, well, you accept this or you don't get an identity card, right? And hence the citizenship rights that are associated to the identity card, right?
Hi, Alex.
Yes.
Apologies to interrupt you, but you have 3 minutes left.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay.
So the Muslim Rohingya experience in the West in the country experienced the worst. Yeah. And of course, you have heard, right, about the ethnic cleansing that was called a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. And then also Pwee, who was a close associate actually to Aung San Suu Kyi, and he supported actually democratic reforms, constitutional reforms, right, against the military, and he was just assassinated. He was just shot at the airport, and there were 2 military henchmen, 2 military officers from the Secret Service behind it. So from the Burmese Myanmar military, the Tatmadaw, the Secret Service of the military. So in a way, the constitutional change in the direction of democratic reforms have raised enormous hopes, yeah. But these also have been very disappointed, right? And there's actually now a consensus actually sorry, about on Islamophobia and especially about the Rohingya, the case of Rohingya, that is widely shared, not only by the military. Yeah, so I don't say that the militaries are kind of the only bad guys, although they clearly are. But the anti kind of Muslim sentiment is widely shared also in the NLD, yeah, the National League for Democracy, and Aung San Suu Kyi herself, yeah, and she has actually defended Myanmar in the International Court for Criminal Justice in The Hague, yeah, in The Hague, when Gambia was bringing up the case actually of genocide, yeah, and that the Rohingya have to be protected. Aung San Suu Kyi, she traveled all the way to The Hague, yeah, to defend actually the military. Yeah, yeah. So in this sense, and also some of the actually not some all the Muslim candidates have been banned for the 2015 elections, because Aung San Suu Kyi was concerned that she might lose Buddhist votes. Yeah, so she banned her own members. Yeah, her own members of the National League for Democracy of her own party, right, to stand for the 2015 national elections. So, sorry, I have to close here.
Yes.
And of course, I'm very happy to send you the full paper after it's published.
Yes, also, I think, Alexander, you can also post here at the chat box your email address so that the participants can email you and get in touch with you if they have further questions about your presentations.
Yeah, I just hope that I've made my point clear.
Yes, we get your point, especially on the imperialist claims and the xenophobic apprehensions done with the Patani Muslims in Thailand and also with the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. We have one question here before we go to Ben from Mel. And this is, I think, also very similar to Benjamin's presentation about how to contextualize and conceptualize nation state based on Islamic perspectives. And you can see here the Muslim minorities in Thailand, in Myanmar, and also even in the Philippines, the Moro Muslims had tried to decolonize, tried to make efforts in decolonizing their aspirations. But I think as they go on with that operations, they are met by violence by the state. So you have these Muslim minorities, and I'd like to read the questions. The question from Mel. You mentioned about efforts of civil society actors in Myanmar, such as interreligious dialogue, building or strengthening peace networks, and working for the rights of minorities. Up to what extent can we say that these are indeed decolonizing strategies of the minority groups as opposed to donor-driven strategies or probably state-driven strategies? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, right. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, there is an alliance of NGOs of different faith, which is very, very meaningful in Myanmar. Yeah. And they actually, first of all, they observe also like Mabata activities, right? When Mabata spreads propaganda and hate, yeah, so they prepare books and videos, etc. And these are very, very influential in Myanmar, right? They portray Muslims as a kind of savage, right? And as a threat, yeah, as a threat to the body of Myanmar, so to speak, especially also to women's bodies. And so the race and religion laws are also against them, right? Intended actually But first of all, they observe these activities and document them, right? So they reveal actually that this is fake news, yeah, and or fake, I mean, like fabricated, yeah, like rumors, spreading rumors, and so forth. And this is a very important, this documentation on the one hand, also to raise consciousness, right, to what is actually going on, yeah. So this is one thing, and the other is very important educational activities, yeah. Also from all religions, actually, in all religions, they try to establish a counter narrative, right? So in this sense, interreligious dialogue is very meaningful, but it happens really in everyday life. It happens much really in everyday life, and but so there are lots of, if you like, there are lots of civic organizations and coming up, and ethnic political parties coming up in the ethnic minority regions, etc. There's lots of good stuff going on in the monasteries, in Christian colleges, and so forth. Yeah, and this is of course. This is kind of trying to claim this public space in a way. But people are very disappointed with the leading party, yeah, with the National League for Democracy in the sense. Because, as I said, Aung San Suu Kyi, called the lady, right? She has been really very, she has actually joined the nationalist narrative very much.
All right. Thank you. Do we still have other questions for Alexander? If none, we can still continue our open forum, Alexander, after Benjamin's presentation. Will that be okay with you, Alexander?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yes. So you can just stay tuned for there, and then we'll go with Benjamin's presentation on very exciting presentation, which is very similar to my research interest on the Western and Islamic concepts of nation state, limiting post-colonial political development in Muslim-majority countries in Asia. Currently, Benjamin is a PhD candidate at the International Islamic University of Malaysia, but also at the same time a Singaporean diplomat, right? Am I correct?
Yeah.
So you have the virtual floor. I'll stop this screen sharing. I think you have a PowerPoint to share to everyone.
Yeah.
All right. So you have the virtual floor now, Benjamin. Take it away.
Okay. Selamat po. Magandang hapon, everyone. Let me just pull out my slide. Can we all see this? Is that good?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Let me just go to full screen. I think I can go to full screen. Hang on a minute. You can see full screen, or is it on a slideshow? So, give me a minute.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll just keep an eye on that. It's easier for me. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I will say that I actually have never done anything specifically to decolonial studies or decolonizing. So it's really exciting for me to be part of this conference to understand this whole area of decolonial studies. I do come from a political science background, and I'll just quickly go into my profile in a minute. My topic today is really coming out of my PhD thesis that I just submitted not too long ago. 2 months ago, and I'm waiting to graduate. And I am from Singapore. I am a PhD student at International Islamic University of Malaysia. And I've been looking at Western and Islamic concepts of nation state, specifically in the context of Muslim majority countries, in this case, Malaysia. And I took my PhD thesis and put a little spin on it and looked at it from the angle of how this actually limits post-colonial political development. I thought it'd be worth highlighting that for me, the majoritarian context that we're looking at here is actually a majority religion in an Asian country. And so in Malaysia, we're looking at Islam, but in many other countries in Asia, like Buddhism in Myanmar or Catholicism in the Philippines, there is a majoritarian religion that actually puts pressure on minorities. There's a lot of work and research on Muslim minorities, but actually there's very little work done on Muslim majorities and what that means for non-Muslim minorities. And so that's kind of the angle that I've taken. So a bit of my background, as what Nassef says, I'm 52 years old, so I'm actually very, very senior mid-career PhD person. So I am from Singapore. I was for many years a Singapore foreign political diplomat, handling China, Southeast Asia, and specifically Malaysia. I have spent some time in the Singapore Defense Ministry and Home Affairs Ministry as a policy officer. So I come from the background of being a practitioner. My first degree at Cambridge was nothing to do with politics at all. So I literally became a political science person on the job. I went on to become executive director for an NGO that did medical services in Asia, and then ran my own business strategy consultancy company for 18 years in the private sector. So most people know me as a businessman. However, I've done a lot of consultancy for NGOs and for governments as well because of my government background. Here's my profile. I've done my master's in public administration, and I've just finished my PhD waiting to graduate. And I'm also an adjunct research fellow at Singapore's Rajaratnam School of International Strategic Studies, and I have a small role in Chiang Mai University. So I basically wanted to show everyone that in terms of academia, I'm a novice. I'm going to be a newly minted PhD, but I come from a second career in the business and government world that has been very helpful for me. So a quick introduction. I'm going to try and do this within 20 minutes because I know we have a time limit, but there's quite a lot of ground that I'd love to cover. And you'll see the overview here on the screen. I will rush through this very quickly. Those of you who are interested to go into greater depth, I can send you my thesis, which basically is almost 80% of what you see here. But very quickly, I'm going to start by first outlining concepts of Western Islamic nation states. This is a very dichotomous and false distinction, but I'm making this distinction only because it's a very often assumed distinction between the Western and Islamic concepts of nation state. And again, I'm using Islamic only as an example because it could also be Western and Buddhist concepts of nation states, right? Western and Hindu concepts of nation states, and how Asian religions is seen as antithetical to the Western concept. Then going to take a look at the role and place of religion in nation state theory and how that plays out in the context of post-colonial Asia, especially in terms of political development of countries in Asia, specifically Southeast Asia. I will then look at something really interesting that's at the core of my own research, which is post-liberalism and post-Islamism. In this part, I'm actually going to propose that post-liberalism and post-Islamism actually come together in a confluence in Malaysia and actually meets. And I think that meeting of post-liberalism and post-Islamism in Malaysia actually shows the way forward for political development, for post-colonial political development in Asia. Obviously, then I'll take a deep dive to look at Malaysia itself, the religion, its relationship with the nation state, as well as not just one Islam, but many Islams. And I know that there are Muslim colleagues in on this call here, I'm not talking about Islam's as in many different faiths. It is one faith, but there are many different manifestations of the Islamic faith in Malaysia, especially in relation to political development. And then my concluding part would be how actually Malaysia and Islam represent something called public religion, religions in public, and how religions in public need to interact in the public sphere for the creation of public good, which will then justify a proactive and conducive role for religion to play in today's nation state theory for the future of a post-colonial world. So that's kind of the overview of my presentation paper today. Quick introduction, as I said just now, the paper looks at how Western Islamic concepts of nation state limits post-colonial political development, especially in religious countries in Asia. Countries in Asia with religion as a major player. And I would say almost all countries in Asia has religion as a major player, except maybe for China, where communism isn't a religion. And I would also say Singapore, because Singapore really is trying its best to be secular without a state religion. Indonesia technically doesn't have a state religion as well. Pancasila is not a religion per se, but obviously Indonesia is very, very Muslim as well. We're going to take a look at Muslim majority countries in Asia, specifically Malaysia, as an example. And the example is not just as an Islamic country, but it's an example of an Asian country with a majoritarian religion. So the same principles would apply into Buddhism in Myanmar, into Catholicism in the Philippines and the likes. And then my paper proposes that post-liberalism and post-Islamism actually come together to point the way forward for post-colonial political development in the world. And I think Asia has an opportunity to show the way ahead. And obviously this paper then proposes that Malaysia specifically has, I think, the potential to actually craft something that will be a model for Muslim majority countries around the world, as well as majoritarian religion countries as well. So let me dive in very quickly, and I'll take this at a fairly quick, brisk pace. So forgive me if I'm moving a bit fast. So Western concepts of nation state really, in a nutshell, started with the Westphalian Peace Treaty in 1648 that ended 30 years worth of religious war in Europe. And it marked the end of what's called confessional states, when states were seen in terms of their religious confessions, right? So you have Catholic Italy, you've got Protestant Britain, you've got Lutheran Germany, a lot of these confessional states that was up against other states in terms of religious confessional conflict. And the treaty really brought a peace to the war, but more importantly, the Westphalian Treaty brought about a desire for a modern concept of a secular nation state, where the nation state would not have religion at the core anymore, and that the church and state should be separated. So therefore, religion was privatized and marginalized, and religion ended up being managed by the secular nation state, rather than in many monotheistic religions like Islam, religion should be the overarching across everything and over politics instead of the other way around. As a result of this, you have rise of modernism, secularism, liberalism, democracy, and a neutral nation state. There's a lot to unpack here that I have in my paper if you're interested. But whilst this was happening in the West, concurrently, Islamic political thought was carrying on through caliphal history, which maintained the central role of and place of Islam or religion in a nation state. And this went all the way, right through right through recent years, even with the Arab states in the Middle East, as we will see. And within Islam, again, as an example of a majoritarian religion, the ruler is appointed by but accountable to God through the people, Ummah, and their representatives. These are religious representatives and teachers of the law, ulama, through a public consultative process called the Shura. And you actually see that there's a lot of very similar concepts of public accountability, of democratic consultative processes within this religious concept that's actually inherently there, even though it's set up in an antithetical way with Western concepts. So we then assume that religion is actually outside of the realm of Western politics. But in reality, that's not true. Because even though you have this Western secular nation state, After World War II, especially, there is this big drive towards the need for a common public moral ethic or a common public based moral values that holds a society together. And Habermas and Foucault from the West are two big names that tried to call for this in the 1980s. That was picked up in the 1990s by people like Capel and Casanova that basically talked about a moral majority, right? The common man coming forward to say that, no, we cannot have a secular society that doesn't have religion. No, we cannot have a secular liberal society that doesn't have a base moral code that holds everybody together. And so there's this real drive for religions to come back, with what Capel has called revenge of God, and what Casanova calls public religions. And that led to severe questioning of whether a secular, liberal, neutral state with religion by the side is actually the way forward, and also a rise of something called post-liberalism, which I will talk about on the next slide. On the Islamic side, interestingly enough, in the 1940s to 80s in the Middle East, many Islamic political thinkers and activists in the Arab states started to also react. But their reaction was different. Their reaction wasn't within a Western country, but from an Arabic country that was being colonized by Western capitalist powers. And they saw this colonial period as the West bringing secular capitalism into their religious communities in the Middle East, and therefore eroding Islamic culture and Islamic beliefs amongst the people. And that led to a rise of this concept of a modern Islamic state by Islamic thinkers of the day then, like Rashid Rida, Muhammad Abdul, Said Qutb, Al-Banna, and Mawadi, which is from the Indian subcontinent. And this rise of this concept of an Islamic state is also because of the end of the last caliphate that became a People's Republic in the Middle East, that then in Egypt, that then led to a lot of Islamic thinkers saying, no, we want the caliphate to continue. What would an Islamic caliphate look like in today's modern times? And hence the idea of a modern Islamic state. And I'll come back to that concept a bit, because that really has a big bearing on the Muslim communities in Southeast Asia. So what has resulted then is basically a limiting or a stunting of post-colonial political development, especially in Asia, and in this case, especially in Southeast Asia. And my theory is that whilst Western modern secular liberal nation-state theory was very, very quickly adopted by post-colonial nation-states, while this is happening, actually many modern post-colonial Asian countries were still trying hard to maintain and preserve religion in state and politics. So one good example is where Malaysia in the 1950s became independent. Basically, as a post-colonial independent nation state in Asia, they took on many of the civic and government institutions of Britain. And so it had an elected parliament, it had a British-style democracy, it has British-style institutions and bureaucracy. And so there's a lot of Western, modern, secular, liberal nation-state structures that gets inherited or adopted into post-colonial Asian nation-states. But they end up struggling with the fact that religion is very much at the heart of the nation. And how then do you balance religion, especially Asian religions, in state and politics when a post-colonial independent country has adopted the structures and the institutions of the West, but is essentially still very, very Asian in terms of religion and religious beliefs? And so therefore, you've got Buddhism in Thailand and Myanmar, you've got Catholicism in the Philippines, Islam in Malaysia, in Brunei, Hinduism in India, right? And a lot of this post-colonial political development has ended up being hampered or being stunted by conflicts between Asian statist religions, right? So Asian states that choose a religion to be their state religion, right? That's what statist religion means. how an Asian nation would choose a religion as a state religion, and then how that ends up conflicting with modern secular nation-state structures and laws and civil courts and institutions that this very same Asian nation-state has adopted. And so you end up with religion versus secular. You've ended up with religious laws and civil laws being in conflict with each other, religious institutions and civil institutions being in conflict with each other. I don't know enough about many other countries in Asia, but Malaysia has demonstrated a lot of this. The Hudud law in Malaysia and the discussion whether Hudud law should apply only to Muslim Malaysian citizens or it should apply to all Malaysian citizens regardless of religion, right? Where certain cases tried in the Sharia courts in Malaysia would lead to certain results, but then if tried in the civil courts in Malaysia would lead to a different result. And so which court has greater say or which court supersedes which? That's a really difficult contention in Malaysia that actually gets played out in, I'm sure, in southern Thailand, southern Philippines, and other places where you have a majoritarian religion dealing with a minority religion in its midst. So my proposition is that modern nation-state theory, especially the Western version that has been adopted in post-colonial Asia, is really unable to address the coexistence of different religions in a single religion majority nation-state, right? So in this case, Islam in Malaysia is a majority, but then Islam in Thailand, Islam in Philippines, Islam in Myanmar are minority religions in majoritarian religion countries like Buddhist Thailand, Catholic Philippines, Buddhist Myanmar, right? And so those problems inherently hold back political development in post-colonial Asia. So this is my theory where that post-liberalism and post-Islamism actually do come together to point the way forward. I'm going to admit upfront that this is very controversial and it's meant to be because it's meant to have people sit up and say, oh, wow, what is this all about? It's also controversial because post-liberalism and post-Islamism literally has only just started maybe over the past 5-6 years. And so the concept is still evolving. It hasn't quite settled down. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity to be involved in this research and this narrative and to shape it in a way that would be positive for society. So Western liberal nation state, basically in 2017, 2018, started to be really severely criticized in the West for identity politics that atomize a people. So basically a country becomes atomized, becomes fractured by people who say, oh, I'm the elite class, I'm rednecks, I'm Muslim, I'm Hindu, I'm women, I'm LGBTQ, I'm male, I'm handicapped. And all these identity politics ends up fracturing a society rather than pulling it together. And the reason for that is because of the concept of a liberal state, a neutral state that says everybody has his own identity and you must respect everybody for their own identity. Wonderful place to start, but liberalism led to a place where a country, a people cannot hold together. So rise of post-liberalism basically advocated the need for a moral public sphere and common shared values that will pull together a community, right? And prevent it from fracturing or atomizing because of liberal identity politics. And here are some authors recently from last year and this year that has been writing about this. As I said, this is very fresh, very new, very frontline research. And then meanwhile, in post-colonial Islamic state theory, a lot of the Islamic thinkers in the Arab states found it very difficult to reconcile, right, Islamic state concepts, traditions, from traditions of Islamic thinking, and modern day concepts of democratic consultation, modern day concepts of a ruler being accountable to the people, right? And you do have people like Muhammad Assad in Pakistan and others, Fazlur Rahman, who try and integrate the Western concepts and Islamic theory. But you also have many who maintain that Islamic nation state, Islamic politics, Islamic law is totally diametrically opposite to those of the West. And you see that, that narrative being played out in Asia a lot. And what that has led to is, again, this dichotomy between West and Western and Islam, or Western and Asian religions, that has again stunted political development, because you just cannot move beyond a certain framework that has boxed you in. So people like Olivier Roy in 2004 started this concept of post-Islamism. But it really is Asef Bayat of 2013 that really, to me, broke through by defining post-Islamism as Islamism reaching to a point where it really needs new ways of thinking about Islam and Islamic political theory in a way that could move forward. And so Bayat came up with the idea that Islamic State concepts had to and could integrate with secular ideas of civil state without undermining its religious beliefs, that would have a civil non-religious nation state that would accord an active role for religions in the public square, right? And that same post-Islamism actually is coming at post-liberalism from the other way. Post-liberalism is trying to put religion back into liberal society. Post-Islamism is taking religion in society and saying, how can we put non-religious elements in that? And I believe that both actually can meet in the middle, right? So now we look at Malaysia. So post-colonial Malaysia in 1950s, I mentioned, really was modeled after a Western British secular democratic nation-state model. But it had Western-style parliament, government, civil courts, judges, federal constitution, but it also clearly states Islam as its state religion, just stopping short of saying that Malaysia is an Islamic state. And Malaysia therefore also has Islamic laws, Islamic courts, the Sultan and King is the head of state, is also the Islamic religious leader. And that has led to decades of just very difficult uncertainty between where Islamic law and civil law comes together. And where Islamic law and civil law has conflicted, right, it's been a very difficult process within Malaysia to find that balance or to find their way forward. And again, for me, that shows a real difficulty to establish a steady state post-colonial political development that can really integrate and balance Islamic religious and secular civil law. So you have in Malaysia some recent thinking with people like Muttalib and Hofstadter and Surya Dinata that say there are different types of Islams. It's not just one Islam. There are different types of Islams at play, right? You've got an Islamic state, but you've also got Muslim majority states, and you've got Muslim states. And Muslim states are states with Muslim beliefs, but do not state Islam as its do not say it's an Islamic state, right? Muslim majority states would be like Indonesia, very much Muslim majority, but Islam isn't necessarily the majority, the official religion. And then Hofstadter then also says that, hey, in the early years in the 12th to 15th century, Islam in Southeast Asia was very much accommodating, right? It was able to coexist with Hinduism, with Buddhism, with local religions, but it was the British colonial period that really put Islam into a box and say Islam is ceremonial, is ritual, right? And separate from government. And with post-colonial Malaysia, you see this resurgence of Islam in politics with different political parties like UMNO, like PAS, that play the Islamic card, that play the Muslim card, that says that Malaysia needs to be more Islamic, or Malaysia, the Muslims need to be the primary peoples whose benefits we need to look after. And Islam also in Malaysia became institutionalized and bureaucratized, so that Malaysia's centrally defined statist Islam has ended up being the definition of Islam for Malaysia of the day, even though Islam in private, Islam in the NGO sector, and in some cases, Islam in the religious sector could actually be very different. So this is my ending. My ending is really where people like Habermas, Foucault, Salvatore have started to develop this concept of public sphere, not civic society, but public sphere, where in the public sphere, state and non-state actors come together with religious actors, with a common desire to co-create common shared values that will help develop and nurture public good for all. And in this process, post-liberalism and post-Islamism can come together in this concept of a public sphere where religion can become a positive role, religions, not just one, a positive role in society, and not seen to be negative or destructive or marginal or terrorist or violent at all. And I think that opportunity is very real for Asia because religion is so much a part of Asia. So here's my last slide, right? So the future of post-colonial political development in Asia, I believe, has to be one that has the opportunity to be one where there is a positive, constructive role for a statist religion. Malaysia is Islam, but Myanmar it's Myanmar and Japan it's Buddhism, Thailand is Buddhism, Philippines is Catholicism. So an opportunity for a statist religion to coexist and proactively partner with other public religions in the public square, to work together to create public good for all. And I think Malaysia has the opportunity to demonstrate that with Islam as a very strong, strong characteristic religion, and what that can do for Malaysia, which is essentially a post-colonial modern nation state. And I think that's the only way that we can break apart this antithetical dichotomy, antithetical dichotomous framing of Western versus Islamic, or Western versus religious nation state concepts that constantly hold Asian countries, in paralysis and not be able to go to move beyond. So for me, just to end, I think Asia, specifically Southeast Asia, really has the opportunity to create a new post-colonial political future with religion and religions in public as active players for the good or better of society. Thank you. That's my presentation for today.
Thank you, Ben, for wonderful presentations. Do we have questions for Ben? You can also speak and talk to Ben. Now, while they're thinking about their questions, I have some thoughts about your presentation. Post-Islamism by Bayat, and also a study done by Oliver Roy, and post-liberalism. I think that there are certain examples where we can manifest post-Islamism as Bayat has exemplified. For example, AKP's party in Turkey can be a good example of a post-Islamist political party. But in terms of Asia, in Southeast Asia, you can see that within the Islamic realm, there are nuances and also differences of Islam with Islams. For example, in Southeast Asian Islams, there are acculturations happening. You can also take a look that there hasn't been what we might call an intra-faith dialogue among and between Muslim groups. You have Sufis, you have Shia, you have Sunni, and even within Sunni, you have different jurisprudential groupings. So how can we get into that kind of imagined post-Islamism state or positionality if there are many different manifestations and even in the exegesis of the sources of Islam differed within and among groups. And you can see that many religious Muslim groups in Southeast Asia, but also throughout Asia, have used violence to impose what they think is the pure and what they think is the true Islam. So you can take a look at, for example, the Salafi movement have had taken at its toll in 21st century political group in Muslim societies.
Thank you for that, Nassef. I think what I'm trying to do actually is to exactly take the concept of post-Islamism that Asef Bayat has used outside of our Southeast Asia country context. I'm trying to bring that into Southeast Asia because I want to say this whole concept of post-Islamism isn't really set in stone yet, because even Roy and Bayat has very different ideas about what that is. And there are other authors who said there's a difference between post-Islamism and post-Islamicist. And post-Islamism is about Islam needing more categories to think about politics. Post-Islamicist is about violent Islamicists that are looking to go even more beyond where they are. And so I think that the categories and the semantics are not set in stone yet, which is why I think it's so exciting for us to bring this concept of post-Islamism into Southeast Asia, where we've got the biggest group of Muslims sitting in Indonesia, and you've also got so many varieties of Islam within Southeast Asia, the Malay archipelago, across 4 to 5 different Southeast Asian countries that we could look at. I will say that I think you're completely right. I think there's a lot more dialogue that can and needs to be done within Islam or Islams, and across religions. It's important to say that there are other ways to come at dialogue other than violence. And I'll just take, Nassef, your question and integrate it with the question from Mel Reyes that's on the chat as well, right? So I really think that the responsibility to create this public sphere to become a positive place where public players, especially public religions, can come together to dialogue and not just to come into violence with each other. I think that responsibility lies with the government. And I look to my colleagues and friends in Patani in southern Philippines, southern Thailand. Southern Thailand, in some places, southern Thailand, the local Thai governments have actually created roles in the local government for local Muslim leaders to become part of the local government. And so there is actually a tripartite structure that's created in the southern Philippine states, southern Thai states, where you've got the government, the Thai government, the Buddhist religious leaders, and the Muslim religious leaders coming together with the local NGOs, non-religious NGOs, to together create that public sphere where they deal with healthcare, they deal with poverty, they deal with livelihood, they deal with bottom-up issues in a way where the religions come positively together to co-create this, rather than to put religion aside and to say this is only something that the government does. I know I don't have enough research, so I'm not as familiar, but I do know that there are certain places in southern Philippines that have also started that, where the local the local Islamic leaders of the Muslim community is actually welcomed and incorporated into the local provincial or regional governments, so that that's true. And I also want to add that whilst the responsibility to create this public sphere, I think, lies in government. I think where government cannot do that or isn't doing that, I think that's where other non-state players in the public sphere has to take that on, whether it's the NGO or whether it's religions, right?
Yes. I think in simpler terms, with regards with Islamist and Islamism, or Islamist and post-Islamist, is that these are responses to colonization by Western forces in 19th up to 20th century. The Islamist movement is to create an Islamic state that pertains to what the group of people understood Islam is within the political realm. So it's more on establishing an Islamic state that is happening as one of the responses by Muslim groups during the 19th and 20th century. So what Bayat is talking about is trying to reconcile a 20th and 21st century understanding of polity that had been influenced by what we call Western modernity, and getting and accommodating that Western modernity is part of what he's thinking about post-Islamism. So you have a post-Islamist understanding that people, Muslims, who wanted to establish an Islamic state and yet recognizes the influence of Western modernity, that somehow accommodate the Western modernity in their daily lives. So there is a kind of accommodation, gradual integration to Western modernity as what we think of what is the modern Muslim human being is in this 21st century. So instead of going through back of establishing a through and through Islamic state, then we can have a public sphere where Muslims have reconciled, have accommodated, and welcomed certain aspects of Western modernity.
I'll add to that for everybody's sake. Today, actually, as I was coming to the office to take this conference, I was listening to the radio. I think all of you know the biggest news that's happened today, which is that one of the Middle Eastern states have actually reestablished ties with Israel. And that is a big news around the world because nobody thought that an Arabic Islamic state in the Middle East would even try and reach out to and build peace, with Israel, and it has. And I think what's interesting in the radio news that I heard today is that there's actually a lot of these inter-religious dialogues, in this case, interstate dialogues that's happening very quietly behind the scenes, whilst a lot of times what we hear is more the violence, the negativity and the conflict where it doesn't actually needs to be. And so I think this is really an opportunity for Southeast Asia to look at our own decolonialization process, to see where religion stays, where religions are, and for us to not let religion or religions end up derailing our own political development process in Asia.
Yes, that was surprising, but for some, but for me, it was not surprising at all, because
those who haven't been listening to the news,
the Palestinian movement, I'm not sure if Arab states are really sincere about the Palestinian movement.
I'm sure a lot of it is
because they've been trying this. Yes, because they've been, using this as their battle cry against Israel. But you can see that decades ago, when Egypt had cemented a negotiation, a treaty with Israel, not only Egypt but also Jordan had tried to have a normalization and diplomatic relations with Israel, and now you can see that in one Gulf country. So I don't think that they are really sincere. But I don't know here in Southeast Asia if I think Mahathir, the current leadership of Malaysia is also part of what he think is. I think is he the one who established or advancing the Hadari civilization?
Yeah, that's Anwar. But yeah, that's Abdullah. But yeah, agreed. But I think for where it's relevant for us in Southeast Asia, especially for southern Philippines, southern Thailand, and to a great extent Malaysia as well, is again the same model where you have majoritarian religions with minority religions coming together and looking at larger public good topics in the public sphere, like healthcare, like poverty, like livelihood, like education, and to have those public good or common good themes define the coming together of the religions in the public sphere, rather than to come at it from the context of religious conflict. And I'm a diplomat. I spent many years in the diplomatic service. A lot of times, as you rightly say, Nassef, there's more than meets the eye, and something that is touted as a religious truth actually is all about trade and economics and all that. But for me, that's fine, because if trade, economics, and all the non-religious factors can bring a community together so that the conflicts can then become less destabilizing, that's good for everyone. And I think that's exactly the model that I think Malaysia has the potential to show, and for that to be taken to other majoritarian religions in Southeast Asia, as I said, like Catholic Philippines and minority Islam, in the south, and like Buddhist Thailand and minority Muslims in south of Thailand as well.
Yes. Thank you, Benjamin. Do we have
welcome.
questions from our other participants in this Zoom panel?
I'm looking at the chat, so just feel free to chat, everyone, and I will put down my email so that you can email me separately if you like.
Yes. We have Abdul Makaampaw, Clarice, Seb Cardeno, James Paredes, Gianna Balonso, Jen Harvey Gamas, Carl Abias, Casey Sierra, Leslie, Anne Villanueva, also KL Chiva at UP, Maria Isabel Luna, and Mary Charles, Liz Angel, Nicole, Andre Marcus, Noraldine Gunting, Ru Alonto, Ruth Zarina, and yes. If you have any question, you can just, raise your hand and I'll let you talk to Ben. Or if none, you can also email Ben the email which was posted by Ben in the chat box. All right. So, and I think also Ben, you said that this is the moment where you are now getting familiar with decolonial aspects of research.
Yes.
Do you think that
new to me.
there is a possibility that you can incorporate decoloniality in thinking and doing in your research?
Well, I would love to. I mean, when I was at university at Cambridge, I was actually studying postcolonial literature. So the first presentation of this session with the children's storybooks was really a blast from the past, because my undergrad thesis was on postcolonial literature. As I said, I became a diplomat. I worked in the business for many years. It's so interesting to come back and now see decolonialism as a topic that's still very relevant today, and that's very fresh for me. So I do intend to try and incorporate that perspective into what I'm doing and to understand it a lot more.
Yes, but as you know that decolonial is distinct from post-colonial.
Yes.
Post-colonial has been co-opted by the Western hegemony and knowledge creation.
That's why decolonial is a very new term for me.
Yes, decolonial is trying to break away really and changing and trying to suggest radical change, breaking away from the colonial matrix of powers that influences all the aspects of lives that we are now, all the institutions, all the learning strategies that we have been acquainted and trained since we were young, were all based on Euro-American centrism. So I think decolonial is very, very tough. And that's the reason why many people, even in the community of scholars, find it, some not welcoming to the decolonial agenda.
Yeah, I think the challenge that I see is exactly, Nassef, is what you said, that it's not so much about the decolonial narrative. I think it's more around if we break away from the previous colonial frameworks, what alternatives are we coming up with? And the challenge, even in my own PhD research, is that we don't fall into the risk of setting up our own little pockets of solutions, or our own little pockets of content for this process. So we don't want to say, oh, Malaysia's got this narrative, Malaysia's got this solution, and it's uniquely Malaysian, and so it cannot be applied to Brunei, or Indonesia's like this, and therefore the decolonial process decolonial thinking in communities like this, and it cannot be applied elsewhere. I think we also want to find some, my challenge is to find commonality in theory in Asia, so that we don't end up being a fragmented group of theories that are so localized that we can only look at each other from afar. I think that underlying process of theoretical construction in Asia is what excites me, right?
Yes. So if we don't have any questions from the participants, I think we can now end the session. And we are very, very thankful to you, Benjamin, to Alexander, and also to Jose Monfred for participating in this conference. This is recorded, and we will upload the session in our YouTube channel so that the what we have discussed here and also what we have presented, Benjamin, will be will be accessibly to the public. So thank you so much, Ben, and thank you for everyone for taking your time with us and for this session. So that's it, and thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.